Wherever people settled, they had to contend with providing transport if they were not to become isolated from the growing country. Consequently, much of the success of a community is intricately tied to the development of its transportation system. The Pioneer Valley was no exception to this rule. Long before highways such as Route 91 bisected the territory, there were people and goods which required mobility. They had neither decent roads nor modern over-the-road carriers which we know today. And who could imagine using the air corridors? Yet, out of this need to link communities together for the collective benefit of the residents, emerged various modes of transportation. They were all successful to a certain measure, each in their own time and in their own place. Our cross-country road map was more often a map of rivers and streams, with trails to portage from one waterway to another. Yet nature had provided a marvelous highway for the settlers in the Pioneer Valley, the mighty Connecticut River. Granted, it was difficult to navigate. Nonetheless, it grew to be a valuable source of transportation for both man and goods. The local Indian population had long ago, out of necessity, mastered the craftsmanship of birch bark canoe building. They were determined to travel up and down the river, reaching places practically impossible of access by other means. Movement became comparatively easy when, with the aid of their canoes, they could change their quarters in search of food, and later, in trade with the colonists. The early settlers were to derive equal benefit from the river as their highway. As settlements grew along the banks of the Connecticut, it became necessary that they develop a method of traversing this dividing line. Ferries were established as early as 1648, and for 100 years they were the only method of crossing, allowing men and merchandise to be carried to an opposite shore. Most were operated by means of cables, pulleys, and the force of the current. Some were even poled across. The operation of these town and privately owned ferries aided the prosperity of river trade during this period. Even with the advent of the building of wooden bridges, as the country grew more settled, a few ferries were to continue in use into the early 1900s. There is abundant evidence of crossing points throughout the valley. Their landing areas are overgrown with brush, but several modern streets serve as silent reminders. The river continued to grow in importance as a means of transportation as it charted the evolution of yet another method of conveyance, the commercial enterprise of canals. This was one of New England's first real attempts at improving transportation. The canals must, of course, follow the water source, and in the Pioneer Valley, that meant the Connecticut River. These artificial waterways were intended to provide a safe, adequate, and reasonably inexpensive means of ending the isolation of great sections of New England. They, for a time, opened a market for the farmer and backcountry mills, as well as provided employment for a vast amount of the male population. Positions of captains, boaters, lock tenders, and weight masters were quickly filled. Consider that prior to the construction of canals in the Pioneer Valley, the principal means of freight transportation was by flatboats propelled by poles on the Connecticut River. This was slow, tedious work, and the boats had to contend with times of high water and floods. The construction of the canals was not accomplished by engineers. America had none at that time, nor was there any excavating equipment to use. The builders were local surveyors. They were men of long experience with poling flatboats upstream and portaging around falls. They had no great technical knowledge to assist them, and yet man-made rivers were indeed cut through our most difficult countryside with only the help of simple tools. One of the most ambitious undertakings was the construction of the Farmington, Connecticut, Northampton, Massachusetts Canal. It required the construction of a canal from the tidewater area in Connecticut to ascend to 97 feet above sea level at Northampton. The total length was 80 miles, and there were 32 locks in Massachusetts, 13 of them in Westfield. The cost of construction was approximately $13,000 per mile. The packets, as the canal boats were christened, were pulled along a towpath by donkeys and moved along at the fast clip of 4 miles per hour. They were used not only as a method of freight transportation, but soon were also regarded as a fashionable, exciting, and enjoyable travel experience for many of the area's residents. One could journey from Northampton to New Haven, Connecticut in 2 days. Unfortunately, the anticipated freight traffic never materialized to any great extent, and the maintenance costs were excessive. Passenger travel alone could not alleviate the operating expenses. Navigation also proved impossible during winter months. The canal can still be traced through sections of Northampton, and remnants of it are easily recognizable in the woods on either side of O'Neill Street in East Hampton. Another reminder of this era is a simple plaque which marks the site of a warehouse which stored arriving freight. This silent monument is located at the Edwards Church corner on State Street in Northampton. Water transport had only a brief predominance, but doubtless that development of our area would have been slower without the barges, flatboats, and passenger-carrying craft of the time. But what of the interior, those vast sections of our area isolated from the shores of the river? Man first relied on horse and oxen, both for personal transport as well as movement of goods. They served him well for a time. Most residents owned a horse or two for personal use, and those who did not supported the livery stable business, a particularly successful enterprise in the college towns throughout the Pioneer Valley. The streets of the villages and towns were geared to accommodate the animal population, and there were many fine turnouts, watering conveniences, and the inevitable hitching posts and mounting stones were in sight throughout the region. The horse and buggy endured into the early 1900s, and the types of buggies, wagons, and carriages were as varied as man's imagination. They were not only used for private transportation, but served civic duty as well. The school bus was in use long before the mechanized yellow one we know today. The fire department's main propulsion was also of the four-legged variety, the harness always lying in wait for an impending emergency. By the 1800s, roads had begun to weave their way throughout the wilderness, but their use was still almost entirely dependent upon the weather, and New England weather is not kind to the traveler. An Amherst man once asked the local driver about the condition of the road to Northampton. Capital was the reply, only 2 wet spots. Later, the traveler complained that he had to plow through mud all the way. That's what I told you, 2 wet spots, one from Amherst to the bridge, the other beyond. Vintage road signs have been faithfully preserved by some far-sighted towns. Some of them mark old coach roads and are often located near lodging houses, which provided overnight accommodations for coach travelers. The fastest service of the day for passengers contemplating a long journey were the stage and mail coaches. They succeeded in reducing travel time, and their routes crisscrossed the countryside, connecting the towns and villages of New England. The arrival of the Concord coach impacted favorably upon the transportation scene. Its name came from its place of origin, Concord, New Hampshire. Those considered superior were built by the firm of Abbott Downing Company and quickly became famous not only throughout New England, but throughout the United States and in foreign countries as well. The town of Greenfield is the fortunate owner of an authentic model and proudly shares the coach during civic activities. Structurally, the coach resembles an 18th century English model. It has an ample, egg-shaped body which rests upon two lengthwise thoroughbraces consisting of several leather strips. These help absorb road shocks, a welcome comfort not known before. The Concord coach carried 9 passengers inside, plus less fortunate travelers who would cling to the roof of the coach. In days when the stagecoach was the primary method used for long-distance journeys, the inn served a vital role to the traveler. Here was his home away from home. It provided overnight accommodations for the guests, and delivery supplied fresh horses for the next day's journey. Additionally, it served as a hub for village life, actually the town's hub of social and political life. This lively meeting place was a forum for exchange of views, and the newly arrived coach travelers added zest and sparkle to the conversation of the regular patrons. The Pioneer Valley is sprinkled with inns which have survived the transitions in transportation, such as this one being restored on North Sunderland Road in Montague, which bears testimony to earlier times. What travel stories these rooms must store. Transportation was substantially hindered by New England's bitter winter months. The coaches still ventured forth, though predictably schedules were forgotten. For personal journeys, sleighs actually predated wheeled vehicles. Certainly one was not as handicapped by the precarious road conditions. Carriage riding was often an unpleasant adventure and not to be attempted at all in the snow. Sleighs also did not cost as much as carriages. Subsequently, they were present in many barns long before the buggy found a garage there. Sleighs were made in many different patterns, and the streets of the valley were alive with the various sounds of sleigh bells. Children delighted in hitching onto the back of the sleigh as uninvited guests. Most towns owned a ponderous and bulky piece of winter road equipment. It was pulled by horses and was used to harden the surface of heavy snowfalls to accommodate sleigh travel. Men often rode atop the roller to add substantial packing power. The heavier the load applied to the surface, the better the sleighing. New Englanders may have shivered, but it would seem that sleigh riding warmed the heart, if not the body. Work did not cease during the winter months, but instead was challenged by the elements. New Englanders merely adapted. They used their wits and animals wisely, and again the oxen played a major role. Slowly, a new means of mild weather transportation arrived on the scene. It would soon be responsible for the evolution of hardtop roads. The first of such roads was built not to suit the automobile, as one might suspect, but instead to accommodate bicycle travel. The bicycle offered the village resident a new and lively, not to mention fascinating, mode of transportation. Everyone was soon caught up by this newfangled vehicle. They quickly learned to maneuver them and even formed clubs and conducted road races. It had not only economic influence, as hundreds of factories soon arose throughout the country, but it influenced scientific road building as well. It was in the 1890s that we began to travel by electricity. Strange new vehicles were connecting the hill towns with the marketing centers in the valley villages, the trolley. Lonely trolley routes can still be found in our area, from the Notch in South Hadley to the Arcadia Sanctuary in East Hampton. They crossed the area's waterways to and fro over bridges whose abutments still remain as a monument to earlier days. One of the area's most picturesque heirlooms is the Bridge of Flowers in Shelburne Falls. Now it is a coveted possession we share with visitors to the valley. It was at one time a viable link between townships and remains now a visible link to our trolley history. The trolleys gathered goods and people from the local railroad station regularly in an era when there was frequent rail service daily in the valley. The old trolley line faithfully served the thriving industrial and agricultural communities along the North River Valley between Shelburne Falls and Coleraine. This scenic route was a popular ride on Sunday afternoons before automobiles became a family convenience, and for only 15 cents a ride to the end of the line. People came from many surrounding communities and southern Vermont to ride and enjoy these newfangled trolleys. As lines soon connected one with the other, it became an easy and pleasant trip to visit a neighbor's house in a nearby village or shop at the stores in towns such as Greenfield without bothering to hitch up the horse. Although its decline was almost as rapid as its inception, for a brief span of approximately 25 years, the trolley lines were a major transportation force in connecting our communities. The railroad was a decided step in advance compared with the stagecoach and canal boat, but early travel was not to be envied. The quarters were cramped, either too hot or too cold, without ventilation, and indeed dangerous. But railway traveling soon improved, and towns such as Greenfield and Northampton thrived simultaneously with the growth in importance of the railroads. The countryside became a web of tracks, and roads and rivers were spanned by bridges to convey these fire-belching monsters. What excitement they brought to each and every village as the country depot became important in the transport of farmers' products to the merchants in the city. The lonesome-sounding whistle became the authority for setting one's watch. Today, this same giant, the railroad, is wounded, and the depots are gone or deserted, as the importance of this method of transportation has been diminished. As with previous methods of transportation, they have been ushered out by speed. They have felt the pinch of air and highway competition. Historically, the most recent event which manifested excitement on the streets of our valley was the emergence of yet another vehicle of transportation, first nicknamed the horseless carriage, and later known to all as the automobile. During the decade 1890 to 1900, the building of automobiles became an obsession with many of the local amateur mechanics and small bicycle and engineering works. Almost each town in the valley ventured into the manufacture of these queer-looking, early power-propelled mongrels, some meeting with a small measure of success. The early models were built by hand. They slowly ventured onto the roads to be met with skeptics who claimed, "One hardly ever heard of one of the contraptions getting out of town and back under its own power." Yet as more and more made their appearance on the scene, the novelty soon wore off, and people no longer viewed them as merely a tourist attraction, a fad. The cars lived in rather uncomfortable harmony for a time with the horse and buggy. They would soon dominate the scene. Models seemed to multiply, one more beautiful and powerful than the other as the years passed. Decent roads came slowly, but soon the maintenance of paved roads became a major budgetary item for towns and villages. The same thought seemed to prevail throughout the evolution of our many modes of transportation. The faster a man could travel, the more civilized he appeared. An article which appeared in the Boston newspaper American Traveler in 1828 noted, "There is more traveling in the United States than in any part of the world. Here the whole population is in motion, whereas in old countries there are millions who have never been beyond the sound of the parish bell. Who will undertake to predict the wonderful results of the next half-century?" wondered the author. Indeed, our Yankee ingenuity helped us to accomplish developments in the movement of goods and passengers, which was beyond anyone's imagination.